Morning, ladies. Hello. Hello, babes. How are you? Good to see you. Hi, Beulah. Okay. Can we wait 2 minutes? Let's just wait 2 minutes. Ladies often join a little bit late, and we'll begin, please, God. Okay. We have I think we've got a very nice class today. I must record.
Hello, Bridge.
Hello. How are you doing?
Oh, how are you?
Baruch Hashem. Oh, good. Thank God.
Baruch Hashem. Lovely. I'm going to eat.
Thanks, Roz. Okay, let's begin. So,
No sound, Bridge.
okay, sorry. Can you hear me now? Okay, so this week's parsha is Parshas Vayeitzei. And Yaakov, the son of Yitzchak, the grandson of Abraham, has fled from Beersheba because his brother Esav wanted to kill him for taking the brachas. And now he ends up finally in Haran. Haran is where his mother comes from. And so so now he's returned to the family of his mother. And if you remember correctly, his mother, Rivka, had a brother named Lavan. And Lavan is a sneaky guy, right? He's not a good man. He is a swindler. He's not honest. He's involved in all kinds of black magic. And that actually comes up, I think, in next week's parsha, when, perhaps it's this week's parsha, when Yaakov actually tries to flee from Lavan. And Yaakov marries Lavan's two daughters. So first he marries Rachel, even though his intention is to marry Leia. And he has worked 7 years for Rachel. And when he asked Lavan, why did you trick me? Lavan's answer is, it's not our practice where we live to first marry off the younger daughter before the older. And so Yaakov says to Lavan, however, you promised me Rachel. And so he gets to marry Rachel 7 days later, on condition that he will work for Lavan for another 7 years. So he does. And we are told that Yaakov had such integrity that his work ethic was the same on the last day of his 14 years as it was on the first day of his 14 years. He showed the same dedication to the extent that we are told that he never really had a full night's sleep all the years that he was working for Lavan, primarily because he wanted to make sure that he did a proper job. Okay, so now if we progress in the parsha, we see that Leia gave birth to several sons, and Rachel she is unable to have children. Rachel's womb is shut up and she can't have any children. And she asks her husband Yaakov to pray for her. And then she thinks, and she takes her maidservant Bilhah and she offers her to Yaakov. And Yaakov marries Bilhah, And Bilhah has two sons. She has Dan and Naphtali. And when Leah sees this, she takes her maidservant, Zilpah, and she offers Zilpah to Yaakov also as a wife. Now, interestingly, our commentaries tell us that Leah was hoping, and she had the intention that Yaakov would not accept Zilpah as a wife. However, he did. And we are told Leah felt quite betrayed by this. So although she offered Zilpah as a wife, her hope was that Yaakov would say, no, I don't need her. And then Zilpah also gives birth to a son. And she gives birth to the seventh son of Yaakov, the seventh of the 12 tribes, and they named him God. Now, before we explain that, it's important to understand that Bilhah and Zilpah were of a lower status as compared to Rachel and Leah. And we learn that in fact Bilhah and Zilpah were half-sisters to Rachel and Leah. So Lavan had his primary wife, which was quite common in those days, and then he had a concubine. And Bilhah and Zilpah are the offspring of Lavan's concubine. Therefore, they were of a lower status. And when Rachel and Leah got married, Lavan actually offered Bilhah and Zilpah to each of his daughters as a gift, as a maidservant to serve each one of them. So that was their status. Bilhah and Zilpah are immediately of a lower status, even within this marriage context. Okay, now Zilpah has the seventh child of Yaakov, and it says in the Chumash that Leah said, when this child was born, Ba God. She named him God, and she says, God has come, which Rashi interprets to mean that good luck has come. Mazal Tov has come with the birth of this child. But Rashi also brings two other interpretations. And he says, she said by God also because God was born circumcised. And further, Rashi says, a third interpretation, Leah said by God because she was disappointed or she felt betrayed that her husband Yaakov had married this maidservant, Zilpah. Okay, so we're going to explore all of these three interpretations on a deeper level, and we're going to look specifically at a very interesting concept that comes up. It says, first of all, we are told that Rashi says that one of the reasons that Leah said by God is she's saying, good luck has come. This child is bringing good luck. And the question that we can explore here is, what does it mean, Mazal Tov? What is Mazal? Is there a belief in luck in the Torah? Okay. What is Mazal and how does it affect us as the Jewish nation? So it's a very interesting topic. And what I found through the different investigations that I did, and some of it I heard, just to give credit to the source, some of these ideas I heard from Rabbi Aaron Ruskin, specifically quoting teachings of the Rebbe. But Mazal, we can say, is actually a constellation of stars, okay? Or you could say an alignment of stars. That's what Mazal is. Very interestingly, there's another commentary who says, no, we should interpret Mazal as a decree. So what does this mean? This means that in fact, there is a power in the zodiac, that there can be a constellation of stars, or let's say an alignment of stars, and it does affect us. Now, Mazal comes from the word nozal, which means flow, or you could say drip, or a way of coming down. So Hasidus teaches us, and I'm just going to explain this in a nutshell, and you've heard this idea before, that there is what we call seder hishtalshelus, which means an order of flowing down, or an order of coming down of blessings from on high, or blessings from the Almighty. So this is called seder hishtalshelus, and really what it is there are what we call the 10 sfirot, which are like the 10 powers through which Hashem expresses himself in the world. And below that you'll get, for instance, one of the archangels of that sphera. And below that, a series of angels, malachim, that draw this flow down to each one of us. Now that's not just for human beings. That is for every single aspect of creation. Every single aspect of creation has its mazal, has its flow that sustains it from on high. So if we are to look at Bnei Israel, what does it say in the Talmud? And what does Chazal, what do our sages teach us? It says in the Talmud, Ein Mazal Yisrael, which means that there is no mazal, there is no destiny or predestiny for Bnei Israel. That's very interesting, because we've just explained that there is this concept of mazal, there is this concept of a decree or an alignment of stars that has an effect. So what's it talking about? It's saying that we, as the Jewish nation, have a different relationship with the mazal. There is no destiny for the next one. Oh, I can hear there's a bit of an echo. All right, let's just continue. We've just explained that. Okay. All right. So, Ein Mazal Yisrael actually means that we, the Jewish people, have the ability to bypass this whole order, this natural order of creation, and hook into a place called Ein, or Ayin. Ayin means nothingness. Ayin means beyond the cosmos, beyond the stars, beyond the heavens. Ayin means connecting directly to the Creator, to Hashem. That's how we interpret Ein Mazal Yisrael. It means that we, Bnei Israel, connect to what's above Mazal. If we look at the parsha from several weeks ago, Avraham Avinu actually looked to the stars. And remember that in those days, they were fantastic astrologers, and they could foretell much through the constellations. And he looked to the stars, and he said to God, I see in my stars that I am not destined to have a child. It seems absolutely impossible for me to be able to have a child. And yet, Hashem promised him not just a child, but that there would be a very prolific nation that would come from Abraham, that his children would be as many as the stars in the sky and the sand by the seashore. So how could it be? So Hashem's response to Abraham was, go outside. What did he mean? What's the deep interpretation of that? Hashem is saying to Abraham, you can go outside of what seems to be decreed for you in the constellations. You have the ability to transcend that which seems to be locked in for you in terms of the heavenly constellations. And that's the message that Hashem was saying. Go outside of your box, go outside of what seems to be your destiny, and connect yourself to me, says Hashem, because I am the creator of all life. I am the one who creates miracles. And that's the lesson for us. We are told, Ein Mazal Yisrael, because we as Bnei Israel are not locked into a predestined destiny. We're not locked into an alignment of stars that's going to affect us. We have the ability to transcend that. And in that way, we actually can connect to Mazal Tov, a good destiny, or a change in decree, a decree that will be a good decree. So let's draw that, because the Rebbe explains to us, how do you do that? How do you access that Mazal Tov? How do you access that place that is higher than the stars? And the Rebbe says as follows. He explains that many mystical people and many Hasidim on Shavuot, which is the day where we commemorate the giving of the Torah. On Shavuot, many Hasidim would congratulate one another and wish each other Mazal Tov. And on one level, that is because it's the day where we commemorate the marriage between Bnei Israel and Hashem. The Torah is the ketubah, is the marriage contract between us. And it makes so much sense. We are asked to be faithful to our God and not to pursue other gods. And in this way, we have a healthy and beautiful relationship. And I think that speaks to us because that's what we expect in our own relationships with our spouses. But on another level, we are told that the reason that Bnei Israel congratulate one another or wish each other Mazal Tov on Shavuot is because when Hashem gave the Torah to Bnei Israel's response when he said, will you accept my Torah, is that we said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will understand. So that is very interesting because that normally goes against a person's nature. If you ask most people today, would you just do something before you understand it? They're going to proudly tell you no. I'm a thinking person. I have a developed intellect, and that's not my way. First, I want to understand. I don't want to just be like a sheep. Okay? And there might be merit to that. And certainly we have to keep our promise to Hashem, to nishma, to understand. That's why we learn Torah, so that we understand the ways of God, so that we understand that which Hashem has commanded us. But we start with Naaseh. It starts with the doing, even if that is against our nature. And the Rebbe brings a brilliant parable to explain why this should be the process in terms of the Torah. He says, if a person is sick and they go to the doctor, and the doctor writes out a prescription for them and says, this is the medication you need, take it immediately in order to begin the healing process. If the person looks at the script and says, well, first I want to understand, what are all the scientific components of the medication? And also, what are all the nutrients? And which part of my body does it flow through first? And once I understand all those technicalities, I will take the medicine. And God forbid, it might be too late by the time that person understands. Okay? So the Torah is our entire spiritual, emotional, and physical well-being. Because Hashem loves us. He wants us to excel. He wants us to achieve and to be successful in this lifetime. And that's why he gave us the script or the prescription in order to be able to achieve that. And so, first a person must take the medication, and then they can go and understand it and all the technicalities of it. So too with the Torah. And the Rebbe says that having taken that approach, Na'aseh v'nishma, I will do, and then I will understand, though that was against the nature of a human being to embrace that approach, that is the approach that allows us to access Ein, to access Hashem, to access what is beyond time and space. what is beyond the natural order of the Seder Hishtalshelus, the natural order of how light comes down to us. And when we go against our nature, then it reflects, and Hashem changes nature for us. When we transcend our nature, we are able to reach transcendent heights. So the Rebbe says, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to do that which we are told in the Torah can change decrees. We are told before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that tefillah and tzedakah and teshuvah are the ways to change any decrees that might be already scripted in heaven for us. Because through those three acts, we are able to connect on high. So tefillah is prayer, and through praying from a very deep place within ourselves, from taking our emotions and letting them penetrate our heart, they can be catapulted up into the heavenly spheres. And through that, we make a deep connection with God. And that draws down enormous blessing for us. Through tzedakah, we understand that tzedakah does a rectification for many sins. And in the old days, people used to take on fasts, many fasts, in order to do a rectification for that which they might have done as a misdeed. But today, we don't have the capacity to fast to that extent, and we would get depressed, which is very negative. So tzedakah, one of the ways that we replicate fasting, and we say tzedakah tatzel mimavet, which means tzedakah can save a person from death. You have to understand the huge, huge power of giving charity. And we even know that a person can give charity and ask Hashem for something in return. Hashem says, test me with tzedakah. And of course, teshuvah, which means feeling a regret or a remorse for something and choosing to go forward in a different way, in a positive way. Understanding that that which we have done has severed our connection with Hashem, and with the desire to reconnect and to be beloved in Hashem's eyes. Those are three very powerful acts. So the Rebbe says, take on something that you think, this is not me. Something that you think, I could never do this. It's just beyond me. How many people talk like that? I could never cover my hair. It's just like it's not real for me. Okay, but you're putting a ceiling on your own spiritual growth. And if that seems like such a strange thing for you to do, but where are you in terms of your progression and in terms of moving forward spiritually, where you take on something that is against your nature? Because it's that will allow us to access the mazal tov that is being spoken about here. And it's doable. Sometimes perhaps a person needs to look to get forgiven by somebody else. And it's like the last thing you feel you could possibly do. Or you need to go within yourself and forgive another person. We've learned, many of us have learned together in the past, the enormous power of forgiveness. That forgiveness is so powerful and so beloved in God's eyes that when we choose to properly forgive somebody, and I guess it's a whole process of also telling the person, I completely forgive you, or even asking for forgiveness, then there's a contract that's drawn up in heaven, in Shamayim, and it has our name on, and we can simply fill in the details to say, I have done this for Hashem, and therefore He's offering me that I can ask for something in return. So this is what we're talking about. Now, a person might think, it sounds great, but for me, I'm not a child of Yaakov. I'm not God. I wasn't born into holiness, an environment of holiness, and therefore, it's beyond me. It's not accessible. It's something that feels completely concealed and out of my reach. And the Rebbe brings that that's one of the reasons why Rashi tells us God was born circumcised. Because the foreskin is what covers over the essence. And it seems that the foreskin is what conceals. And God, who represents Mazal Tov, he was born without a foreskin in order to teach us, in order to show us that this is not something concealed from us. It's not something inaccessible. In fact, it is revealed. What about the other teaching that we get from Rashi? That Leia felt that she's superior to Zilpah. Why would her husband Yaakov take on this wife? And not only that, but then he had this seventh child. And we've discussed the number 7. But before that, that too is a lesson for us. Because people might think, no, I don't have like this lineage behind me of holy people. And therefore, I'm not somebody who, again, who can access such spiritual heights. And a person might think, I'm of a lower status. I'm not what we call an FFB. Okay? You won't find that lingo in the Chumash. But it's very much like, modern day from lingo. I'm not a from birth person. I'm a BT. I'm a Baal Teshuvah, which, by the way, mystical teachings teach us is actually a much higher level. But that's one of the reasons why Zilpah had this child, because she's of a lower status, which means that it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter your status. Hashem is interested in our sincerity. Hashem is interested in the heart. That's a beautiful thing. We can't rely on having yichus, on, who my father and grandfather were. Hashem wants to know, but who are you? And I think that's illustrated so beautifully when we look in our Torah. Hashem's given us a perfect example of that. Because look who the ancestress of David HaMelech is. It's Ruth. She was a Moabite princess. She came from a nation of idol worshippers. But she chose the ways of righteousness. She was so taken with the ways of the Torah that she embraced this way of life. And not only did she embrace it as a convert, but she became the ancestress of one of the greatest kings of Bnei Israel, from whom will come Mashiach, the greatest light of Bnei Israel. So we see from there that this child was born to Zilpah to show us that this Mazal Tov, this ability to come close to God, to access aid, that which is beyond time and space, is actually something that we are all enabled to access. And it's very interesting because you see that usually it's people who come from humble beginnings that are catapulted to the greatest heights. And it's their humble beginnings that actually is the foundation that allows them to reach such greatness. Okay, now let's look a little bit more at what it says in the Chumash. You see that if you look in the Chumash, the way that Bagad is written is it's written as one word. So it's written as Bagad. But after that, in brackets, it says the way that it's pronounced or the way that it's spoken of is as 2 words, Ba-God. God has come, or good luck has come. And that means that the way that we pronounce it, we add an aleph after the base. So we say Ba. And that aleph also represents Aluf Shel Olam, the master of the universe, which is Hashem. God was very much connected to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was born and passed away on the 7th of Adar, Zayin Adar. Now, Adar, we know, is also a very special month. So if we're looking at Mazal, if we're looking at the Mazalis of the calendar, then Chazal, our sages, tell us that if you have a court case, or if a person needs to have an operation, God forbid, they should do it in the month of Adar if possible, because there is a good mazal for the Jewish people in that month. However, if a person has a court case or there's something important pending, they should try and avoid having it done in the month of Av, because we know Tisha B'Av is the month in which both our temples were destroyed. It's a month where the mazal is not so positive for Bnei Israel. Obviously, we can transform that, and that's the power that we have. But this is just brought out to illustrate that the zodiac and the constellations in the heavens are something real. And therefore, we can look in terms of how they affect us with times. We can even look in terms of place, because we are told if you move your place, you change your mazal. So if a person feels like where they are, they've only had bad mazal, often they're counseled to move, change your place, you change your mazal, whether it's another country or whether it's another town or even another home. And these things are real. In fact, in the Talmud, it highlights that if a person is born on a certain day in the week, they're going to have certain tendencies. They're going to lean more towards this characteristic or that characteristic. And that's okay. We can work with that information. But we are told not to try and foretell the future through the stars. That is asur. That is forbidden for two reasons. One, it says, Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. Be simple, be wholehearted with Hashem your God, which means simply believe in God. Simply turn to Hashem. Don't turn to all these other strange phenomenons and try to be all sophisticated in trying to project the future. Trust in Hashem. Turn to Hashem. Be simple with Hashem. The other thing is that once a person is told a prophecy, or let's not say prophecy, because that would come from a prophet, which is a person of holiness. But once a person is told a certain, like a forecast, or told their fortune, they're actually locked into that destiny, and they cannot then transcend it. And that's very negative, because it goes against who we are as the Jewish nation, which is a nation that can transcend the constellations in the stars. Okay, let's just look a little bit more at God. Very interesting character. We see that even this month of Adar, which we have associated with God through Moshe, Adar, what is the sign of the zodiac of Adar? It's the fish. How do we say fish in Ivrit, in Hebrew? Dag. And then if we change those letters around, we get God. Very interesting. Okay. Now God, we learn, was the mightiest. He was the strongest out of all the tribes. So the tribe of God would always be at the forefront of the troops of Bnei Israel in any battle. That was because they led, because they had so much strength. And not only that, but it says of God that they were so proficient in warfare that they could simply take their sword and slice off the head and the arm of the enemy in one fell swoop. So this was God. And we learn these beautiful lessons from God, from this mighty warrior, and from this seventh child of Yaakov. Okay, let's bring a story. So I read this story recently, and it starts off in 1952 or 1953. And the protagonist was a rabbi whose name was Reb Chaim Chaikel Miletsky. In 1952 or 53, his son was getting married. And he was a big Torah personality. He was, in fact, a Rosh Yeshiva. And so the wedding was attended by many, many big leaders in the Torah world. Unfortunately, Rabbi Miletsky was suffering from a problem with his feet. And his feet had degenerated to such a degree that the doctors had said that the one foot would have to be amputated within a short while, and they suspected that the other foot would also have to, unfortunately, be removed soon after. So he was brought to his child's wedding on a bed. He was so sick with his feet that he was not even able to sit up. He's brought to the wedding, and he actually asked everybody if they would be silent for a few moments, because he wanted to explain to them why is he suffering from this terrible this terrible phenomena. So he said as follows. He said, when he was a young yeshiva bocher, he studied with many other young yeshivaniks, and they would spend a lot of time in the Beis Midrash, in the study hall, to the extent that they would often be there at night studying the Torah. And he said there was one character who was also always around in the Beis Midrash, and he was known as Itza the Shika, Itza the drunkard. Why? Because he would always drink and drink himself into oblivion and simply pass out. And then when he woke up, he would take to the bottle again, drink and drink and drink, and then pass out again. So nobody really bothered with him. Everyone left him alone. He left everybody else alone. Sometimes the children would tease him. One night, Reb Chaim Chaikel Miletsky was studying as a young yeshiva bocher with the other bochrim, and a young wagon driver runs into the Beis Midrash, and he's frantic. He says it was snowing outside, it was freezing cold, and he said his wagon had turned over and the reins were pulling on the horse, and they were choking the horse, and the horse was going to die. And he asked these young yeshiva bochers, please, come and help me. It's impossible for one person to turn the wagon back up to the upright position. If a few of us do it, we'll be able to save my horse so that it will not be strangulated. What did these young yeshiva boys do? They decided to start having a discussion. And what are they discussing? Is it permitted for us to stop learning Torah so that we can go and assist this man? Or does Torah take precedence and we should tell him to rather go find someone else? And they said to him, we've thought about it. Actually, the proper conduct is that we must continue learning Torah. And this man, Itza the Shika, stood up and he said to them, go and help this desperate Jew immediately. And they said to him, Itza, stay out of this. And he stood up, and with absolute fire in his eyes, he said, if you don't go and help this Jew in distress right now, the day will come when you are unable to go and assist somebody who's in distress. And they laughed at him. They said, Itza, since when did you become a posek? When did you become somebody who's an expert on Torah law? And they said to the wagon driver, run into town and find someone else. And so he did. And then a little while later, the wagon driver returned, desperate, and he said, there's nobody else who I could find to help me. Please come and help me, please. My poor horse is dying. And they had a discussion, and they decided, okay, maybe we should go help him. And as they exited the Beis Midrash, they go outside. It's too late. The horse has died. The next day, Reb Chaim Chaikel said, I went to the yeshiva a little late, and the other bochrim told me, Itza the Shika is looking for you. Okay, he goes to find the drunk, says, yes, what is it you want? Yaitzei the shikha says to him, I'm going to die tonight. I want you to come to my home and be with me, and then call the Chevra Kadisha as soon as I've passed away. And Reb Chaim Chaikel says, what are you talking about? Nobody knows the day of their death. Stop wasting my time. And Yaitzei the shikha says, please, come and be with me. I'm going to pass away tonight. So he decides, well, I've got my Talmud. Whether I learn here or I go and learn there, what difference does it make? He says, okay, I'll come. Tell me where you live. And that night, he went to the house of Yaitzei the shikha, which was an absolute hovel on the outskirts of town. Incredibly poor home. And when he arrives, there's Yaitzei lying on the floorboards, passed out. So he takes his Talmud, he sits, and he learns for an hour. And after an hour, he decides, such rubbish. How did I let this no good Nick, this good for nothing, convince me to come here? And he's so irritated. And he gets up to leave. And at that moment, Yaitzei the shikha says, please, do not leave. At 4 a.m., I'm going to pass away. He says, and when I pass away, I want you to tell the Chevra Kadisha that I should be buried next to that very holy Torah great in the cemetery. This young Chaim Chaikel says, what are you talking about? He says, first of all, you don't even put on tefillin. How is it that you would merit to be buried in such a place of privilege? There's no way they would agree to bury you there. And Yaitzei the shikha says to him, go and look in that box in the corner there and open it up. So he goes, he opens up the box, and he finds a pair of tefillin that are of a very high standard, beautiful tefillin. And he's quite surprised. So he says, okay, Yaitzei, you put on tefillin. That still doesn't mean you merit to be buried in such a holy place. Yaitzei the shikha says, look under that. Look at the box underneath at the manuscripts. And so he opens the box, he takes out the manuscripts, and he sees that there are these incredibly deep Kabbalistic writings and Torah ideas that have been noted down, and they are so profound to the extent that this Reb Chaim Chaikel cannot understand everything that's been written. And he looks and he says, you wrote these? Yaitzei the shikha says, if you show those to the Chevra Kadisha, once I have passed, they will understand and they will agree to bury me where I have passed. Suddenly, Reb Chaim Chaikel realizes this is not some simpleton, drunkard Jew. This is in fact one of the 36 hidden tzaddikim that exist every generation. And at 4 a.m. exactly, Yaitzei the shikha passed away. This young man runs off to find the rabbi and to inform the Chevra Kadisha, and he tells them everything that happened. And they look at the manuscripts and they realize this was an incredibly holy man. He was indeed one of the hidden tzaddikim of the generation. And they say, we would agree to bury him next to that other tzaddik in the cemetery. But there hasn't been a burial spot in that entire cemetery for years. So everybody's already been buried in the adjoining cemetery for a long time now. They say, but if that's the request he made, just for purposes of being thorough, we'll go and have a look. And they go to the cemetery and they actually find a completely open burial spot right next to that holy tzaddik. And so they give Yaitzei the shikha a burial. And now that everybody in town has found out who he is, they all attended the funeral. And so back at the wedding, Reb Chaim Chaikel says to everybody, it was because of the words of that holy man that I am not able to walk today. Because when he said, go and help that person in distress, or the time may come where you are unable to, and we didn't listen, it is because of that that I am unable to walk, unable to assist other people, that I've been afflicted with this terrible condition. But the story doesn't end there. First of all, just to clarify, and it's clear, even if you look in Pirkei Avos, that good deeds should surpass your wisdom. And that if there is a person, a Jew in distress, then what takes precedence is assisting that person, not first learning Torah. But there was a Chabad Chassid who actually attended that wedding in the 1950s, and his name was Reb Leib Fried or Reb Leib Friedman. I'll have to check my sources. But he heard the story and he was very moved, and he wrote a letter to the Rebbe, and he asked the Rebbe to please pray on behalf of Reb Chaim Chaikel Miletsky. And the Rebbe responded and actually told him that if Reb Chaim Chaikel will take on to go in the ways of his father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, then he will indeed have a refuah. He will have healing, and he will be able to also go forward with good health. What's he talking about? He said that his father-in-law had instituted that every single day the person should learn Chitas, which stands for Chumash, Tanya, and saying the daily Tehillim. So this Reb Leib took the letter to Reb Chaim Chaikel, and when he read it, the tears poured down his face, and he kissed the letter with so much affection, because he's getting a second chance. He actually is getting a second chance. And he took on to learn Chitas. Now, the Rebbe had also instructed him to spread the message that people should take on to learn Chitas every day. And he took it on, and apparently he kept his Chitas, his books, on his desk, which he proudly displayed, and he would ask people, please take on to learn every day Chumash, Tanya, and to say the Tehillim, because you are assisting in my healing. Now, when Reb Leib went to visit him after a certain time, he was already sitting up. The doctors had stopped talking about any amputation, and he was indeed on the road to complete healing. So we see that there is a way for us to change our destiny. There is a way for us to access a mazal tov. Sometimes we need direction from a Rebbe. Sometimes we need to look within ourselves and know, what is it that I need to do? What is it that I'm resisting the most in terms of Kedusha, in the ways of holiness? Or what can I do that's going to stretch me, that's going to be difficult for me, that's going to allow me to connect more with my Creator? I'll just end with this. The Rebbe would often counsel people to take on Chitas. It's not easy because it's a daily commitment, and time-wise, it's a big commitment. One of my daughters over lockdown was really, really struggling with a physical ailment, and she was also very, very much struggling in terms of where she was holding socially, where she was holding in terms of her own inner confidence, a lot of emotional stuff. It's very, very painful for parents to see this. And when she wrote to the Rebbe, he counseled her several times, she wrote. One was to see certain doctors, that we should see doctors and get different opinions, which the Rebbe was always of the opinion that you should always get a second opinion from a doctor. And we've taken that route. She's also been in counseling with a therapist, which has been unbelievable. Thank God, you have to find the right therapist. But the Rebbe counseled her that she must do her chitas daily, and everything will be fine. And she stuck to this commitment in the most beautiful way. And bli ein hara, you must see my child today. It's been such growth. It's been such a bracha that she went through this, because we've taken a two-pronged path. One, in the natural way, doing everything we could to assist her, and two, taking on something spiritually, which has been necessary and good to help her. And thank God, there's been such an enormous improvement on both levels, emotionally and physically. And so I'm sharing that to illustrate that that's taught me so much. I kind of like see the truth of the teachings that we're learning in today's class. I've seen it through my own family and obviously through the many stories that we hear. So thanks, ladies. Thanks for joining me this week. If we do a class next week, then please God, I think we must try and focus on Hanukkah. Let's see what we can do. Thank you. Beigi, Roz, Beulah, everybody. I see all the names here. I can't see everybody's name, but I'm so excited to see you. Thanks for joining me again. So nice to see everybody's joy today. Thanks, ladies. Have a great week.